The grand hall of Zenthari Prime fell silent as the transmission began. 12 massive screens descended from the crystal ceiling, each one showing the same image, a human woman in a simple blue uniform standing before a backdrop of stars. The Galactic Council members shifted in their floating seats, some clicking their mandibles in annoyance, others fluttering their wings with impatience. Honored members of the Galactic Empire, the human woman began, her voice clear and steady. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, speaking for the United Human Resistance and all free human colonies across the Outer Rim territories. Emperor Zaltek, his 3 heads towering above the council chamber, let out a sound that might have been laughter from his middle throat. His scaled hands drummed against the armrests of his throne as he watched this tiny creature dare to address the rulers of 1,000 worlds. For too long, Elena continued, your empire has treated human worlds as hunting grounds. Your ships arrive without warning, taking our people as slaves, stealing our children, burning our cities. You have ignored every attempt at peaceful contact. You have dismissed every plea for mercy. Council member Vexhai, a spider-like being, with 8 glowing eyes, clicked his teeth together in what passed for amusement among his species. The pet speaks, he whispered to his neighbor, loud enough for the translation circuits to pick up his words. Elena's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Today that ends. This is not a request, this is not a negotiation. This is a formal ultimatum delivered to the Galactic Empire by the sovereign human nations. The chamber erupted in noise, clicking, chirping, roaring, and a dozen other sounds of alien laughter filled the air. Admiral Kethvar, the Empire's supreme military commander, rose from his seat. His forearms spread wide as he addressed the council. Did this primitive creature just threaten us? His voice boomed through the chamber's speakers. The species that barely learned to leave their home planet 2 centuries ago thinks they can challenge an empire that has ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years? Elena waited for the noise to die down before continuing. The United Human Resistance demands the following. First, all slave raids on human worlds will cease immediately. Second, all captured humans currently held in imperial slave markets will be released and returned to their home colonies. Third, the Galactic Empire will formally recognize human sovereignty over all systems currently inhabited by human populations. Emperor Zaltek's left head turned toward Admiral Kethvar. How many ships do these humans possess? How many worlds do they control? The Admiral consulted his datapad. Intelligence reports 12 inhabited systems, Majesty. Perhaps 300 ships total, mostly converted mining vessels and cargo haulers. Their largest settlement has maybe 2 million inhabitants. 2 million, the Emperor repeated, his right head shaking with what appeared to be disbelief. We rule over 4,000 systems containing trillions of beings, and these creatures with their handful of rocks think they can dictate terms to us. Elena's voice cut through their conversation. You have 72 standard hours to begin compliance with these demands. This is your only warning. The chamber fell silent again, but this time, the quiet felt different, more dangerous. And, if we refuse? Council member Thisara asked, her serpentine form coiling around her floating seat. What will you do, little human? Send your mining ships against our battle fleets? Elena smiled for the first time during the transmission. It was not a pleasant smile. Then you will learn why every species in this galaxy has a word for war, but only humans have a word for extinction. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in darkness for a moment before the lights returned. The silence stretched until Emperor Zalthek began to laugh, a sound like grinding stone that came from all 3 of his throats at once. Extinction, he repeated. Did you hear that, my loyal council? The humans will make us extinct. His laughter grew louder. These creatures who live on 12 insignificant worlds, who have no energy shields, no gravity weapons, no quantum processors, think they can threaten an empire that has conquered entire star clusters. Admiral Kethvar was already accessing his command systems. Majesty, shall I dispatch a battle group to deal with this insolence? A single dreadnought should be more than sufficient to glass every human world. No, the Emperor said, waving one massive hand. This requires a more Educational response. Send the Third Fleet. Let the galaxy see what happens when primitives forget their place. The Admiral bowed. It will be done, Majesty. The Third Fleet consists of 200 ships, including 4 dreadnoughts. More than enough to handle a few converted mining vessels. As the council members began to disperse, discussing this amusing interruption to their day, none of them noticed the small service robots moving through the chamber. These simple machines, used for cleaning and maintenance throughout the Imperial capital, had been performing their duties faithfully for months. No one paid attention to service robots. No one wondered why some of these robots had slightly different internal components than standard models. No one questioned why these particular machines seemed to position themselves near important conversations and data terminals. In a small apartment 3 levels below the council chamber, a human woman named Sarah Chen finished uploading the latest batch of recordings to a secure transmitter. She had been working as a maintenance supervisor on Zenthari Prime for 2 years, invisible among the thousands of other primitive species who kept the Imperial capital running. Her fingers moved quickly across the control panel, sending the Emperor's own words racing across space toward the Outer Rim territories. Every threat, every dismissive laugh, every detail about the Third Fleet's composition and departure time. 72 hours, she whispered to herself, repeating Elena's words. Just enough time. Above her, Admiral Kethvar stood in his command center, watching as the Third Fleet prepared for departure. The massive ships hung in space like metal mountains, their hulls gleaming with energy fields that could deflect asteroids. Each dreadnought carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. He called up the intelligence files on human space, studying the scattered dots that represented their colonies. New Stalingrad, Port Armstrong, Sakura Station, such small, pathetic settlements. He could barely understand how they had survived this long in the hostile environment of space. Admiral, his aide approached with a data pad. The fleet commanders are requesting targeting priorities. Which human worlds should we hit first? Kethvar glanced at the star maps again. Begin with their largest colony, New Stalingrad. We'll make an example of it. The others will surrender once they see what Imperial firepower can do. As he spoke, he had no way of knowing that his words were already traveling faster than his ships ever could, racing toward the very worlds he planned to attack. He could not know that humans had spent decades preparing for this moment, learning from every species the Empire had conquered, studying every battle the Imperial fleets had ever fought. In the depths of space, human ships that looked like simple cargo haulers powered up systems that had never appeared on any Imperial scanner. Mining platforms that seemed to be harvesting asteroids activated weapons that no Imperial engineer would recognize. And on 1,000 worlds throughout the Empire, humans who had worked as servants, laborers, and maintenance staff for years began to prepare for a signal that would change the galaxy forever. The 72-hour countdown had begun. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars blur past as the Third Fleet moved through hyperspace toward human territory. Around him, his officers worked at their stations with the calm efficiency of beings who had never known defeat. Time to target? He asked his navigation officer. 18 hours until we reach the New Stalingrad system, Admiral, the officer replied. Our scouts report normal activity. No sign that the humans are aware of our approach. Kethvar nodded, satisfied. The fleet would drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, deploy in standard battle formation, and demand surrender. When the humans inevitably refused, they would demonstrate Imperial firepower on military targets first, then expand to civilian areas until resistance collapsed. It was a pattern that had worked on hundreds of worlds. Sir, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a transmission from Imperial intelligence. It appears to be an update on human military capabilities. Display it, Kethvar ordered. The main screen showed a series of images, human ships that looked like they had been assembled from scrap metal, settlements that seemed to be built into asteroid mining operations, and defensive installations that appeared to be nothing more than modified industrial equipment. Pathetic, muttered Commander Zis, the Admiral's second-in-command. Look at those vessels. No energy shielding, No quantum processors, no gravity manipulation. How do they even achieve faster-than-light travel? Chemical rockets and primitive fusion drives, the intelligence report stated. Human technology appears to be approximately 500 years behind Imperial standards. Their largest warship mass is less than a single Imperial destroyer. Kethvar turned away from the screen. Reduce the fleet to minimal power. We don't want to accidentally vaporize them before they have a chance to surrender. 18 hours later, the Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the new Stalingrad system. What they found there made Admiral Kethvar pause for the first time in his military career. The system was not what the intelligence reports had described. Instead of a single inhabited planet with a few orbital stations, the Admiral found himself looking at something that defied easy categorization. Asteroids moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Mining platforms were connected by massive cables and energy conduits that stretched between worlds. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were ships. How many vessels are we detecting? Kethvar asked. His sensor officer worked frantically at his controls. Sir, I'm having difficulty getting an accurate count. The asteroids appear to be interfering with our sensors, and many of the signatures I'm reading don't match any known ship configurations. Sir, the communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the human colony. Put it through. The main screen flickered, showing a human man in what appeared to be a military uniform. Behind him, Kethvar could see what looked like a command center built inside an asteroid. Admiral Kethvar of the Imperial Third Fleet, the human said. I am General Marcus Thompson, commanding officer of New Stalingrad Defense Force. We've been expecting you. Kethvar felt a cold sensation run down his spine, something he had not experienced in decades of warfare. You know my name? We know quite a bit about your fleet, Admiral. We know you have 4 dreadnoughts, 36 heavy cruisers, and 160 support vessels. We know your standard battle doctrine calls for a demonstration of force followed by demands for surrender. We know you've used this exact same formation to conquer 47 other worlds. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent. Kethvar found his voice after a long moment. How could you possibly know that information? General Thompson smiled. Because we've been watching you for a very long time, Admiral. We've studied every battle you've ever fought, learned from every species you've conquered, analyzed every weakness in Imperial doctrine, and now we're going to show you something the Empire has never seen before. And what is that? Kethvar asked, though he was no longer certain he wanted to know the answer. A fair fight. The transmission ended, and alarms immediately began sounding throughout the Imperial fleet. Ships that had appeared to be simple cargo haulers were suddenly reading as fully armed warships. Mining platforms revealed themselves to be weapons platforms that defied Imperial understanding of physics. The asteroids themselves began to move with purpose and direction. Sir? The sensor officer called out, his voice tight with fear. I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the system. Whatever those installations are, they're powering up. Battle stations, Kethvar ordered. All ships prepare for combat. The first human attack came not from their ships, but from the asteroids themselves. Massive chunks of rock and metal, accelerated to incredible speeds by hidden mass drivers, began hurtling toward the Imperial fleet. The projectiles moved too fast for energy weapons to intercept, and hit too hard for shields to deflect. Evasive. Maneuvers! Kethvar shouted as his flagship shuddered under the impact of a basketball-sized piece of metal, moving at 30% of light speed. Sir, the humans are broadcasting on our command frequencies, the communications officer reported. How is that possible? I don't know, sir. They're using our own encryption codes. Throughout the battle, something else became clear to Admiral Kethvar. The humans were not fighting like any species the Empire had ever encountered. They did not engage in grand fleet maneuvers or attempt to overpower Imperial forces with superior firepower. Instead, they fought like a virus, adapting and spreading through the Imperial formation. Human ships would attack in small groups, learn from each engagement, then share that knowledge instantly with every other human vessel in the system. When Imperial ships fired their main weapons, the humans would record the energy signatures and frequencies, then broadcast countermeasures to their entire fleet within minutes. They're learning, Commander Ziss said in disbelief as he watched. A human destroyer dodged past 4 Imperial cruisers, seemingly anticipating their firing patterns. They're actually learning from our attacks in real time. But the worst part was what the humans did with their prisoners. Instead of taking Imperial crew members captive, they did something far more dangerous. They talked to them. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmissions from the other subjugated species in our fleet. The humans are broadcasting directly to our auxiliary troops, telling them about the worlds we've liberated, the freedoms they could have." Kethavar felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of military service. Doubt. Not just about this battle, but about the Empire itself. He watched as ships crewed by recently conquered species began to slow their rate of fire, their crews questioning orders they had followed without thought for decades. "All ships," he commanded, "fall back to minimum engagement range. Request immediate reinforcements from the Second Fleet." As the Third Fleet retreated to the edge of the system, Admiral Kethavar realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare had just been proven wrong. The humans had not defeated his fleet through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They had done something far worse. They had made his own ships question why they were fighting. In the depths of space, human communication networks carried the complete records of the battle to every corner of human space. Every Imperial tactic, every weapon frequency, every command protocol was analyzed and shared. Within hours, humans across 12 star systems knew exactly how to fight Imperial ships. But more importantly, the broadcasts were not limited to human space. Using communication networks they had carefully built over decades, humans began sharing their recordings throughout the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had never seen an Imperial fleet defeated watched as the mighty Third Fleet was forced to retreat by converted mining ships and weaponized asteroids. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Empire had shown weakness, and in the darkness between stars, other species began to remember what freedom felt like. The 72-hour deadline passed at exactly 0800 Standard Galactic Time, marked not by fanfare or ceremony, but by silence. Across the Empire, communication networks went quiet for 3 minutes. Then the galaxy learned what humans meant by total war. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the ship formerly known as the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. The registration still claimed it was a civilian cargo hauler, but as its disguised armor plating retracted and weapon systems emerged from hidden compartments, it became clear that Imperial intelligence had been catastrophically wrong about human capabilities. "All stations report ready, Captain," her tactical officer announced. "Stealth systems are functioning within normal parameters." Through the view screen, Sarah could see the Imperial supply depot at Kepler Station hanging in space like a metal flower. Hundreds of ships moved in and out of its docking bays carrying supplies to Imperial fleets throughout this sector. It had been defended by the same automated systems for over 2 centuries, protected by the simple fact that no one had ever been stupid enough to attack an Imperial stronghold this close to the core worlds. "Communications. Patch me through to our friends inside the station," Sarah ordered. The main screen flickered, showing a Zephyrian engineer named Cassatel who had been working at the depot for 15 years. Like many of the Empire's subject species, he performed his duties efficiently, while harboring thoughts he dared not speak aloud. Until today. "Captain Chen," Castel said, his translator rendering his whistling speech into standard. "The shift change occurred 10 minutes ago. Security patrol schedules have been uploaded to your tactical system. You have approximately 23 minutes before the next automated scan." "Understood. Are your people ready?" "We have been ready for longer than you know." Sarah nodded. The humans had learned something crucial in their decades of preparation. They were not the only species that resented Imperial rule. Throughout the galaxy, beings who had been conquered, enslaved, or simply ignored had been waiting for someone to light the first spark of rebellion. "All ships begin the approach. Remember, we're not here to destroy the station, we're here to liberate it." The Lucky Strike and her escort of 12 other merchant vessels moved toward Kepler Station with the lazy confidence of ships that belonged there. Their falsified identification codes had been provided by humans who had spent years working their way into Imperial bureaucracy. learning every system and protocol from the inside. As they drew closer, the true scope of human preparation became apparent. The ships approaching the station were not converted cargo haulers. They were purpose-built warships designed to look like civilian vessels. Every line of their hulls had been crafted to fool Imperial sensors, while hiding weapon systems that incorporated technology from dozens of conquered species. "Station control to approaching convoy," came the automated transmission. "Please transmit cargo manifests and destination codes." "Transmitting now," Sarah's communications officer replied, sending data packets that would show exactly what Imperial computers expected to see routine supply deliveries that had been scheduled for months. Inside the station, Cassatel moved through corridors he had walked thousands of times before. But today was different. Today, he carried a small device that Sarah's people had smuggled to him piece by piece over the past 6 months. As he passed each security checkpoint, the device recorded access codes and transmission frequencies. More importantly, he was not alone. Throughout the station, members of 17 different species performed their duties with unusual efficiency. The Zephyrians handled atmospheric controls. The Corvin miners managed internal transportation systems. The Thissaran technicians maintained the communication arrays. All of them had been contacted by humans over the past 2 years. All of them had been carefully recruited and trained. None of them had ever spoken to each other about their true loyalties. Until today. "Security checkpoint Alpha 7, this is Engineering Station 5. Cassatel spoke into his communicator. "We're reading a pressure drop in Sector 12, requesting permission to reroute atmospheric systems." "Permission granted," came the reply from a guard who had no reason to suspect that atmospheric rerouting was code for disable internal sensors. Throughout the station, similar conversations were taking place. Maintenance requests that would shut down key systems. Equipment failures that would require security teams to investigate empty corridors. Supply deliveries that would position teams exactly where they needed to be. By the time the Lucky Strike docked with Kepler Station, the humans were not invading an Imperial stronghold. They were being welcomed aboard a facility that was already under the control of its own workforce. "Docking complete," Sarah announced to her crew. "Remember, everyone aboard this station is either an ally or a potential ally. We're not here to conquer them. We're here to free them." The airlock cycled open and Sarah Chen stepped onto an Imperial space station for the first time in her life. Waiting for her was Castel, along with representatives from every species that worked aboard the facility. "Welcome to Free Kepler Station," Castel said, his translator giving his words a musical quality. "We have been waiting for you." What happened next at Kepler Station was repeated simultaneously at 73 other Imperial facilities throughout the galaxy. Not invasions, but revelations. Supply depots revealed themselves to be under the control of their own workers. Communication. Arrays began broadcasting messages of liberation instead of Imperial propaganda. Mining facilities stopped sending resources to Imperial fleets and started supporting local populations. The Empire's greatest strength had always been its size and organization. But humans had turned that strength into a weakness by doing something no previous enemy had ever attempted. They had organized the Empire against itself. On Zenthari Prime, Emperor Zalthek stared at reports that made no sense. His middle head swiveled toward Admiral Kethvar, who had returned from the new Stalingrad system with news that the Emperor was still struggling to comprehend. "Explain to me again how a handful of primitive worlds has somehow captured 73 Imperial installations in a single day," the Emperor demanded. Admiral Kethvar's forearms gestured helplessly. "Majesty, we believe the humans have been infiltrating our infrastructure for decades. They didn't capture these facilities. They were already controlling them from within. And our response? Every time we move a fleet to retake a captured installation, they seem to know our plans before we do. They're intercepting our communications, anticipating our strategies, turning our own protocols against us." From his seat at the council table, Intelligence Director Vothak spoke up. "Majesty, we have confirmed that humans have been working throughout Imperial space for years. They hold positions in shipping, maintenance, communications, even some administrative roles. We estimate there may be as many as 50,000 humans working within Imperial territory. 50,000, the Emperor repeated slowly. Out of trillions of Imperial citizens, 50,000 humans have somehow compromised our entire infrastructure. It's not just the humans, Majesty, Admiral Kethvar admitted reluctantly. They've somehow convinced members of other species to work with them. Yesterday's attack on Kepler Station was carried out primarily by station personnel who had been living and working there for years. Emperor Zalthek rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the council chamber. For 10,000 years, the Empire had maintained control through overwhelming force and the simple assumption that resistance was impossible. The idea that subject species might organize against Imperial rule had never seriously been considered. How? He asked, quietly. How did we miss this? Intelligence Director Vothak consulted his datapad. The humans appear to have studied every species in the Empire, learning our languages, cultures, and grievances. They approached potential allies not with promises of conquest, but with offers of cooperation. They didn't recruit armies, Majesty. They recruited individuals. In the depths of space, the human strategy was already moving to its next phase. Warships that had been disguised as merchants for years were shedding their false hulls and revealing their true nature. Mining platforms were deploying weapons that had been built piece by piece in facilities the Empire thought they controlled. Communication networks were carrying messages that would have been unthinkable just days before. But the most important change was in the minds of billions of beings throughout the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, species that had never spoken to each other were working together. The Empire's own communication systems were carrying conversations between Zephyrians and Corvins, Thisarans and Volantians, all of them coordinating resistance efforts that would have been impossible without human guidance. On a small human ship somewhere between Kepler Station and the core worlds, Captain Sarah Chen received a transmission that made her smile. It was from a Corvin mining operation in the Outer Spiral, where workers had just declared their independence from Imperial control. This is Corvin Free Mining Collective, the transmission read. We have taken control of our facility and are requesting instructions from Human Command. Sarah's communications officer looked up from his station. Captain, we're receiving similar messages from installations throughout the galaxy. The Empire, the rebellion spread across the galaxy like wildfire, but it burned with a purpose that no Imperial strategist could have predicted. Where other species had fought for territory or resources, humans fought for something far more dangerous to the Empire's survival. They fought for an idea. On the mining world of Korath Dal, Supervisor. Thane watched through his office window as ships descended from orbit. They were not the sleek Imperial vessels he expected, but a mixture of human warships and converted civilian craft operated by a dozen different species. The landing was not an invasion, but a liberation, and Thane found himself facing something his species had not seen for 8 centuries. Choice. Supervisor, his Corvin assistant Jaxel spoke from behind him. The human commander is requesting a meeting. Thane turned, studying the being who had worked for him faithfully for 7 years. You knew this was coming, it was not a question. Jaxel's spotted hide shifted color slightly, a sign of emotional stress among his people. We hoped it was coming, Supervisor. For generations, we have hoped. The meeting took place in the facility's main conference room, but it bore no resemblance to the negotiations that had established Imperial control over Korath Dal centuries before. Commander Elena Rodriguez, a human woman who looked impossibly young to be leading a military operation, sat across from Thane with representatives from 6 other species that had worked in the mining operation. Supervisor Thane, Elena began, I want to be very clear about why we're here. We're not conquering this world, we're not replacing Imperial rule with human rule. We're offering you something else entirely. And what is that? Thane asked. Self-determination, Elena replied simply. The right to decide for yourselves how your world is governed, how your resources are used, who your people trade with, and what kind of future you want to build. Thane's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep confusion among his species. I don't understand. If you defeat the Empire, don't you become the new Empire? Elena smiled. That's where you're wrong, Supervisor. We're not trying to defeat the Empire. We're trying to make it irrelevant. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place on thousands of worlds. Human forces, supported by allied species, were not conquering Imperial territory in the traditional sense. Instead, they were offering something that had not existed in the galaxy for millennia: genuine freedom of choice. On Zenthari Prime, Emperor Zalthek studied reports that seemed to contradict everything he understood about warfare and politics. His military advisors showed him tactical displays that made no strategic sense. "Explain to me," the Emperor demanded, "how the humans can be winning a war while simultaneously losing territory." General Korveth, one of the few Imperial commanders, to survive an engagement with human forces, gestured at the holographic display hovering above the council table. "Majesty, the humans are not trying to hold territory in the traditional sense. They arrive at a world, offer the local population a choice between imperial rule and independence, then move on. Most of the time, they leave only a few advisors and communication specialists, and yet these worlds remain loyal to them. That's what we don't understand, Majesty. The worlds aren't loyal to the humans. They're loyal to the idea of freedom the humans represent. When we send fleets to retake these systems, we find ourselves fighting not just human ships but vessels operated by the local population." Admiral Kethvar, his confidence shaken by months of defeats, added his own analysis. "Majesty, our intelligence suggests that the humans have fundamentally changed the nature of this conflict. Traditional military doctrine assumes that conquest requires ongoing occupation and control. The humans have somehow convinced entire populations to defend themselves. With what?" the Emperor's left head demanded. "Most of these species have no military traditions, no warrior classes, no weapons technology." "They're improvising, Majesty," General Korveth admitted reluctantly. "Civilian ships are being converted to warships using technology the humans have shared. Industrial facilities are being modified to produce weapons. Even agricultural worlds are finding ways to contribute to the war effort." The Emperor rose from his throne and moved to the great window that overlooked the imperial capital. Below him, the city that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years continued its ancient routines, but even here, changes were becoming apparent. Work crews moved with less efficiency. Security checkpoints took longer to process citizens. Small acts of defiance were becoming more common. "How many worlds have we lost?" he asked quietly. "That depends on how you define lost, Majesty." Intelligence Director Vothak replied carefully. "If you mean worlds where Imperial forces have been completely driven out, the number is approximately 400. If you mean worlds where Imperial authority is no longer effectively recognized by the local population, the number is closer to 2,000. 2,000, the Emperor repeated. "Out of 4,000 systems in the Empire." "Yes, Majesty, and the rate of defection is accelerating." In deep space aboard the human command ship New Horizon, Admiral Elena Vasquez reviewed the same statistics with very different emotions. The war was progressing faster than even the most optimistic human projections had suggested, but success brought its own complications. "Admiral," her intelligence officer reported, "we're receiving requests for assistance from rebel groups in over 300 additional systems. Most of them are asking for weapons, advisors, and communication equipment." "What's our response? Capability?" Elena asked. "Limited, ma'am. We have enough human personnel to provide meaningful support to maybe 50 additional systems. Beyond that, we'd be spreading ourselves too thin to be effective." Elena studied the tactical display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red markers indicated systems still under full Imperial control. Blue markers showed human-controlled space, but the majority of the display was covered in green markers, worlds that had declared independence but were essentially governing themselves. "Captain Morrison," she addressed her communications officer, "open a channel to all Allied commanders. I want to discuss something that might change our entire strategy." Within hours, human commanders throughout the galaxy were participating in a conference that would have been impossible under Imperial communication protocols. Instead of a rigid hierarchy issuing orders from the top down, humans facilitated a discussion that included input from representatives of dozens of species. The question before us, Elena explained to the assembled commanders, is whether we're ready to trust our allies to fight their own battles. Commander Sarah Chen, speaking from a captured Imperial shipyard, raised the obvious concern. Admiral, most of these species have no experience with military operations on this scale. Are we talking about leaving them to face Imperial retaliation alone? Not alone, Elena clarified, but as equal partners rather than protected clients. The humans provide technology, training, and coordination. Our allies provide local knowledge, personnel, and most importantly, their own motivation to fight for their freedom. The discussion that followed lasted for 6 hours and involved perspectives from beings whose species had been enemies for centuries before the human rebellion brought them together. Zephyrians shared their expertise in atmospheric warfare. Corvins offered insights into industrial sabotage. Thycerans contributed knowledge of Imperial computer systems. By the end of the conference, a new strategy had emerged. Instead of humans leading a rebellion against the Empire, they would become the coordinators of a galactic revolution in which every species fought for its own liberation. The effects of this decision became apparent within weeks. On worlds throughout the galaxy, beings who had never seen a human began implementing tactics and technologies that human advisors had shared through secure communication networks. Imperial fleets found themselves facing resistance that adapted and evolved faster than their intelligence services could track. More importantly, the revolution began to develop a momentum that no longer depended on human military success. Even in systems where Imperial forces managed to defeat rebel fleets, the ideas of self-determination and cooperation between species continued to spread. On Zenthari Prime, Emperor Zalthek realized that he was facing something unprecedented in the galaxy's recorded history. For the first time in 10 millennia, beings throughout his empire were asking not just whether they could be free, but whether they deserved to be free. And increasingly, they were answering that question in ways that terrified him. In the outer rim territories, human colonies that had been the original targets of Imperial oppression were now becoming centers of learning and cooperation. Species that had never communicated before were sharing technology, culture, and dreams of a future that no one had previously imagined possible. The galaxy was not just burning with the fires of war, it was burning with the light of hope, and that fire was spreading faster than any fleet could travel. The final message arrived on every Imperial communication network simultaneously, cutting through security protocols and emergency channels with the ease of water flowing downhill. On millions of screens throughout the galaxy, from the humblest mining station to the Emperor's own throne room, the same simple words appeared: "You were warned." Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history assembled around her flagship. But unlike any military force that had come before it, this armada represented not the conquest of one species over others, but the cooperation of hundreds of worlds that had chosen to fight together for their shared freedom. "Fleet status report," she requested. 1,500 vessels ready for final approach to Zenthari Prime, her tactical officer announced. Human ships comprise approximately 30% of the force. The remainder represents 47 different species and 212 liberated worlds. Elena nodded, studying the tactical display that showed their approach to the Imperial capital. Each ship in the fleet told a story of liberation. Corvin mining vessels converted to assault craft, Zephyrian atmospheric fighters modified for space combat, Thyceran research ships carrying weapons designed by species who had been enemies just months before. Communications: open a channel to Emperor Zalthek. The main screen flickered, showing the grand throne room of Zenthari Prime, where the Emperor sat surrounded by what remained of his Imperial Council. His 3 heads turned toward the screen with an expression that Elena had learned to recognize in dozens of species. The look of someone watching their world change in ways they could never have imagined. "Emperor Zalthek," Elena began, her voice carrying easily across the vast distances between them. "I am Admiral Elena Vasquez, commanding the United Liberation Fleet. We are approaching your capital system not as conquerors, but as representatives of every world that has chosen freedom over tyranny. The Emperor's middle head spoke first. "You realize, Admiral, that Zentauri Prime is defended by the most powerful military forces in galactic history? Even your impressive fleet cannot hope to overcome the orbital defense platforms in the home fleet." Elena smiled. "Your Majesty, with respect, I don't think you understand what kind of war we've been fighting. Around Zentauri Prime, the orbital defense stations that had protected the Imperial capital for 3 millennia began to power down their weapon systems. Inside each station, beings who had maintained those defenses for generations made a choice that their ancestors could never have contemplated. Defense Station Alpha 1 to Imperial Command," came the transmission from the largest orbital platform. "We are standing down our weapons and opening our docking bays to the Liberation Fleet. Defense Station Alpha 1, explain your actions immediately," Admiral Kethvar commanded from his position in the Imperial Fleet. "Admiral," the station commander replied, "this is Commander Yethsal. My crew and I have voted to join the Liberation. We will no longer fire upon beings who are fighting for the same freedoms we want for ourselves." Similar declarations came from 17 of the 23 orbital defense platforms. The mighty ring of weapons that had made Zentauri Prime unconquerable was welcoming the very fleet it had been built to destroy. Emperor Zalthek watched in stunned silence as his most trusted defenses declared their independence. "How?" he whispered. "How did you turn our own people against us?" "We didn't turn them against you, Your Majesty," Elena replied gently. "We simply reminded them that they had a choice. The battle for Zentauri Prime, when it finally began, was unlike any military engagement in recorded galactic history. The Imperial home fleet, reduced to perhaps 60% of its normal strength by defections and the need to guard other critical systems, found itself facing not just superior numbers, but a completely different philosophy of warfare. Human tactics had evolved far beyond the simple adaptability they had shown in early engagements. Working with dozens of allied species, they had developed strategies that no Imperial military academy had ever considered. Corvin ships used mining techniques to tear apart the superstructure of Imperial dreadnoughts. Zephyrian fighters employed atmospheric tactics in the vacuum of space, confusing Imperial sensors and targeting systems. Thyceran vessels hacked Imperial computer networks while engaging in direct combat. But the most devastating weapon in the Liberation Fleet's arsenal was something no military force had ever deployed before: hope. Throughout the Imperial Fleet, crews who had served the Empire faithfully for decades found themselves questioning orders they had never thought to challenge. When Liberation forces disabled Imperial ships rather than destroying them, when they offered medical aid to wounded Imperial crews, when they broadcast messages of welcome rather than demands for surrender, something fundamental changed in the minds of beings who had known only conquest and domination. "Admiral Kethvar," came a transmission from the Imperial cruiser Eternal Victory. "This is Captain Zorthian. My crew has voted to stand down our weapons. We request permission to join the Liberation Fleet." It was not an isolated incident. Across the battlefield, Imperial ships were choosing to stop fighting rather than continue a war that no longer made sense to them. The Empire's greatest strength, the unquestioning loyalty of its military forces, had become its greatest weakness when those forces finally understood what they were fighting against. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Kethvar watched his fleet dissolve around him. Ships that had served the Empire for centuries were either surrendering to Liberation forces or simply powering down their weapons and refusing to fight. The few vessels that remained loyal to Imperial command were vastly outnumbered and completely outmatched. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a direct transmission from the Liberation Fleet flagship. Put it through." Admiral Elena Vasquez appeared on his screen, but her expression showed no triumph or arrogance. Instead, she looked tired, as if the weight of everything that had happened was finally settling on her shoulders. "Admiral Kethvar," she said, "your fleet has fought bravely, but this war is over. I'm offering you and your remaining ships the same choice I've offered everyone else. Join us in building something better, or return to your homes with the guarantee that you will not be pursued or punished." Kethvar looked around his bridge, at crew members who had served with him for decades. In their eyes, he saw the same exhaustion he felt in his own hearts. They had been fighting for an empire that no longer existed, defending a system that even they no longer believed in. "Admiral Vasquez," he said slowly, "I formally surrender the Imperial Home Fleet to your command." In the throne room of Zenthari Prime, Emperor Zalthek sat alone. His council had dissolved hours ago as members slipped away to negotiate their own arrangements with the liberation forces. His guards had abandoned their post when it became clear that no one was coming to restore imperial authority. The palace that had been the center of galactic government for 10 millennia was now simply a building where an old being sat contemplating the end of everything he had known. When Elena Vasquez finally entered the throne room, she came not with an army, but with a small group of representatives from a dozen different species. They walked quietly through halls that had witnessed the subjugation of countless worlds, their footsteps echoing in spaces that had never before heard the voices of free beings discussing the future as equals. "Your Majesty," Elena said as she approached the throne, "the Empire is finished. The question now is what comes next." Emperor Zalthek's 3 heads turned toward her with what might have been curiosity. "And what do you propose, Admiral?" "A choice," Elena replied. "The same choice we've offered everyone else. Help us build a galaxy where every world determines its own fate, where species cooperate instead of dominating each other, where beings like you can find a place without needing to rule over others. And if I refuse?" Elena shrugged. "Then you retire to whatever world you choose and live whatever life makes you happy. We're not here to punish anyone, Your Majesty. We're here to make sure that what happened to the galaxy over the past 10,000 years never happens again." 6 months later, representatives from nearly 3,000 worlds gathered on a space station built in the neutral territory between what had once been human space and the Imperial core worlds. The Galactic Federation of Free Worlds was not established through conquest or negotiation between great powers, but through the simple recognition that beings throughout the galaxy shared common values and common dreams. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Federation's first coordinator, stood before the assembled delegates and spoke words that would be remembered for millennia. "We are here not because we defeated an empire, but because we chose to build something better. We represent not the triumph of one species over others, but the triumph of cooperation over domination, of freedom over tyranny, of hope over fear." Throughout the galaxy, on worlds that had been slaves for centuries and on others that had never known anything but freedom, beings who had never thought to dream of such possibilities began to build the future they wanted to see. The fires that had burned across the galaxy during the war had not destroyed civilization. They had forged it anew,